All right, welcome to Flex Live. I'm Whitney Munro, founder and CEO of Flex Partners. And today we are going to talk about building a brand and audience, but probably not in the way you usually think about it. Because real brand building is not just about public moments. It's not just the press hit, the campaign launch, the polished message, or the big announcement. It is the years of saying yes to opportunity, the early mornings, the behind the scenes work, the relationships built before anyone needs anything, the discipline of showing up consistently even when no one else sees it. And our guest today understands that better than most. So, Brian serves as National Press Secretary for the American Federation for Children, where he helps lead the national press voice for one of the most important education freedom organizations in the country. He brings nearly 15 years of experience advancing school choice as a consultant, communicator, in-state partner, and now national press leader. Before Brian was at AFC, he served as the executive vice president of Parents for Educational Freedom in North Carolina, where his work helped expand access to school choice programs for thousands of students and families. He's also someone whose story is rooted in service, including his family's Air Force background and the principle he lives by: service before self. Brian is also a friend of mine, currently celebrating the Carolina Hurricanes Stanley Cup victory, and also joins me in the often miserable but always true blue fandom of the New York Giants. So, Brian, welcome to Flex Live.
Quite a lead in, but obviously some important delineation points there. And yeah, we're just a couple days removed from the Carolina Hurricanes. I live just outside of Raleigh, hoisting Lord Stanley Cup for the first time in 20 years. And my 10-year-old and I went to watch parties at the Lenovo Center for game 3 and then game 6 the other night. And just, Whitney, what a blast. I mean, to be in the arena with 20,000 fans, even though the boys are 2,300 miles away, it felt like we were a part of the game. And to share in that collective experience has been incredible. And yeah, with I've got some North Jersey roots in my parents. And so if the Giants can do a turnaround here and Jackie Dart and Cam Scadaboo and company can right the ship, blue skies ahead. So we'll see what happens.
Let's do it. I'm excited too. And congratulations. Watching the fans in the arena, like you said, thousands of miles away, have a in-game experience was pretty cool. And as a Stars fan who was hoping we'd be playing you in the finals, I'm really glad you guys took it home. So let's start with your path, because one of the things that has always stood out to me about you is that your career does not follow a perfectly planned ladder. It's definitely not linear. It's almost a series of moments where you did what we talked about a minute ago. You said yes, you worked hard, and then you earned the next opportunity. So take us back to the beginning. How did your early TV days shape the way you think about communications and your work today?
Yeah, put a little timestamp on it. I graduated college in 2003 and, had this dream of being a sports center anchor. I went to school at Appalachian State University, Boone, North Carolina, electronic media communications, wanted to be a broadcaster. I was like, I'm going to become a sports broadcaster and I'm going to make it all the way to, Bristol, Connecticut. And I got my first job in TV in Wichita Falls, Texas, as a production assistant on the morning newscast. And I would show up to work at, 3:30, 4 in the morning, and I would do all the prep work to get us ready to go on the air at 6 a.m. And this was all behind the scenes. And I wasn't on camera at all. And I wasn't a sports broadcaster at all. And was just, got a little dose of humility, but also got the experience of what it was like to be in a TV station. And when you talk about sort of saying yes to those opportunities or just finding opportunities and chances, relatively quickly, I walked right into the sports office. Chris Horgan was the sports director at the time. Aaron B. Jackson was the weekend sports anchor. Shout out to those two great mentors. And I was like, I'm done with work every day at 12:32 when we sign off the noon show. What can I do to help you for free? What can I do to learn? And I basically became like an unpaid intern in the sports department. And those 2 taught me a lot, and they gave me a lot of, tangible experience and real world experience, and I learned about shooting sports better and cutting tape and putting shows together and all that, and, it was a great experience, and I owe those 2 a lot, and I owe that opportunity a lot. I met my wife there at that small TV station in Wichita Falls, only a couple hours north of where you sit today, Whitney,
True.
right there in the Red River, and, when Aaron left and the weekend sports anchor job opened, I was like, "Cool, they're gonna give me this job," and they didn't, and they gave it to somebody else, which was great, and Alana Rizzo, has done incredible things, sideline reporter for the Dodgers, like, covered Major League Baseball, and so did amazing stuff and got to learn from her. She moved on to her next opportunity, And the news director gave me the chance. And part of what we did, and sort of wrap up this sort of first phase, is I went to him when I didn't get that weekend sports job. I said, "Is there anything I can do to get some on air experience?" And what we did at the time, and this is in the weeds, but our sports director would record morning sports during the 10 p.m. newscast the night before. I said, "Is there any way I could do morning sports live?" And he's like, "You still have to run all the cameras in the studio. You still have to do all your regular production assistant work. But if you can figure out a way to get that camera set, we'll let you give it a shot." And I went to the weather guy, John Cameron. I said, "It's important. Right? Remember these names and like just thank them for the
Amazing.
opportunity." I said, "John, I need your help. I'm going to be in a half suit, like shirt, tie, jacket, shorts in the studio. If I get on the desk, can you set the shot for me?" And it was not above him or below him to do that. And he helped me out. And that's how I got my first chance to kind of be on air. And then, got that weekend sports job, a few months later and was able to kind of progress from there. And so just, make an opportunity, saying yes to opportunity, being willing to just do the work when nobody was looking, when I wasn't getting paid. It really was important in those early days.
So none of this surprises me because if someone asked me to describe you, I'd say one of the hardest working people and passionate and just like getting down and doing all the work, no matter what it is that I've ever met. So props to the crew in Wichita Falls, which you're right is not too far from me, and I won't hold the App State reference against you.
You got it.
Um, but I think those little moments that you described, from who you learned from and gave you chances to the big moment where you took the opportunity to figure out how to open a door, they kind of shape, even though none of it's really public facing, all those things are building the brand that you
That's
put
right.
together for yourself
Yeah.
as an individual. Um, and a thing we talked about even going into this was do the work, even when people don't see you doing the work, which is central to the story you just told us. How has unseen work from there shaped other parts of your career, but also how you've identified people they're like, I want to work with that person or they've
Yeah.
got it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're right. I mean, your brand is who you are, right? I mean, I think first and foremost, it's who you are, and it's not just when people are watching on platforms like this. It's kind of who you are all the time, and you want people to know who you are by your actions. I mean, your words have a lot to carry, but really, your actions are show them that. So, like, had that job in Texas. We got to go to Illinois for about 5 years. Learned a lot more about television. In 2010, my wife and I made this very real decision to leave the broadcasting space, to leave the news space, move a little bit closer to home, head back to the East Coast. She's from Philly. We were ready to start a family. And candidly, we just didn't see how that fit in sort of that news style lifestyle. And it works for a lot of people, but for us, and especially as a sports guy, I mean, I'm at work till midnight every night, every weekend, major holidays. Like that's when major sports happen. So that wasn't really fitting in sort of what we wanted for our life vision to have a family. We moved back to DC 2010 so we could be a little bit closer to family. We moved back with one job, and I didn't have a job when we moved back, and I was caddying at a golf course, which was a great experience, right? Got to meet some great people, got to walk around, got to play golf for free on Mondays. And I basically was just beating down doors trying to look for opportunity. And I found a military nonprofit. And at 29 years old, almost 30, I took a job at making, like, I don't mind telling you this, $500 a month as an intern, helping them with this incredible project. Now, it was a great organization that helped Gold Star families, families who have lost loved ones in combat. So it was mission driven for me, given my father's background as a 36 and a half year Air Force veteran, my entire family, my grandfather's in World War II, my brother now in the Space Force. So it was a great fit and a great opportunity, but it was one of those where I was doing a lot of work that nobody was seeing. But, a few months into that, the comms director took another opportunity and I was able to then, slide into that role and sort of prove my worth there. And in doing that, I got to meet a great individual who knows about brand and knew about building organizations and supporting organizations when we weren't forward facing. Philip Stutz. And I joined Philip Stutz and Company about a year into that move into DC. We then grew that to become Go Big Media, which is now a big digital media firm in Washington, D.C., doing work across the country. And again, it was a lot of that, like, just stuff that people didn't see. And through that journey, right? Philip brought me on board. He said, "All right, you've got to go out and find some clients." Freedom Works was a client for me. That's how you and I met, right? Doing a lot of
Yes.
great work, right? Celebrating and growing freedom across the country. Great experience in Utah with you on your birthday on the
That's
4th of
right.
July, right? Where we got to be in a parade, which is pretty sweet.
That's pretty awesome.
But he introduced me to the American Federation for Children and really taught me more about this idea of school choice. And I just loved the issue and felt great to be a part of helping grow that company, Go Big at the time, but also start to really grow this education freedom movement, which, fast forward, now we're fully involved in it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's been amazing to watch, from that period to now, what you've done and what you guys built at Go Big that personally we got to work together for. And one of the things that really stands out for us working with mission based businesses and organizations is trust. And
Mhm.
as you're growing a business like Go Big and what you're doing now, trust with your clients, with the subjects that you're working with, is key to your brand. If your brand is not trustworthy, people aren't going to work with you. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on just how important trust and credibility is as you're growing and building something, whether it's a business or a personal brand.
I mean, think about what we were doing there. When we were Go Big, we were a political media company, right? But we also did public affairs, advocacy campaigns. So whether we were working with candidates, right, on congressional campaigns, Senate campaigns, running digital for them, or if we were working with public affairs or nonprofits like American Federation for Children, right, we're entrusted with those valuable resources, first and foremost, that they have to go out and raise. And I really take that to heart, and it's something I've really focused on over the last 10 years. When I joined Parents for Educational Freedom in North Carolina, now being with AFC, and even go back, when we were at Go Big, when we were servicing clients like specifically the American Federation for Children, right? Those are valuable donor dollars that those entities must go raise, that they then deploy across the country. And specifically in AFC's, lens, and same thing for PEFNC, you're talking about advancing educational freedom. One of the most important issues I think our country faces today is the future of our nation and what K-12 kids specifically, how they're going to be able to lead. And if education isn't unlocked and tailored to them and given to them in the best way that they can learn, we're in a tough spot, and our country will be in a tough spot. And it's why I just believe so much in the issue. And I think back to, like, when we moved to North Carolina when I was a kid going to the fourth grade. My dad was in the Air Force. We were not wealthy by any stretch, but they had the means to send my brothers and I to a very small Catholic school, and it shaped the rest of our lives. We had that opportunity, other kids don't. And so to be able to fight for that, but then to also be constantly thinking about, someone gave really valuable resources to this effort, believe so much in what we're going to do, what we're doing, they're willing to send their money into it. You've got to think about that every single day, because you've got to be a good steward of that. You've got to be able to act in good faith, and you've got to be trustworthy. You've got to make sure that if it's your client, right, when we were political campaigns, right, those are hard dollars to raise. Everything we're going to
Yes.
do is going to try to put you in the best position to win this thing. Right, in the nonprofit space, every dollar you raise, everything I'm going to do is I'm going to try to put us in the best position to win the issue, and ultimately in that space serve millions of kids across the country. Right, I got two in my house now, two girls, 14, 10 years old. They're our entire world. But there are millions of kids like them across the country, and there are millions of kids that don't have the resources that they do. And so that's why we fight so hard. That's why we just want to be good stewards. That's why we have to be trustworthy, to not just on the client side, right, but also on our donor side too.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, when you're doing this work, you can trace it back to individual families and kids who are going to benefit when you win.
I've met
And
them.
so
I've sat with them. We've cried with them. We've talked to them, right? Not just in my home state here in North Carolina, but across the country, right? When you sit across from a family and you hear their story, single mom working 3 jobs, wants nothing more to get her kids in the school that's gonna best meet their needs. I gotta remember them every single day. Even if we're getting our tails kicked on an issue, or if you're up against, 15 deadlines, you gotta remember ultimately who you're serving. Service before self, you said at the beginning, like, this isn't about me. This is about Charlonda Brown in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and her son Amore, who got into a school that best met his needs. And now he's at East Carolina, and he's going to have an incredible life because school choice helped unlock that for him. Like, you have to remember that.
yeah, I mean, look at you right there. That's a particular family that you helped. And one of the things that is also as important to everything you just said is authenticity. Trust, credibility, but authenticity as well. And as you have seen in talking to some of these families and seeing potentially what your competitors have done, um, talk to me about the authenticness of your brand, of brands for the companies you work with, and also of the issues that you are fighting for when you're doing this work.
I mean, you think about, like, the work we do at AFC spans a lot of different avenues, right? And multi states across the country. But we do policy work, we do legislative work, we do political work, right? We do implementation work to make sure school choice programs are full and robust. But ultimately, all of that sort of stacks up on one key component, right? That's parents, families, and students. Right? They're the face and the voice of this thing. they're the ones that really matter the most, are the ones that we're fighting for. And so my authentic voice needs to be a champion for what they're doing. Now, in this national press secretary role, my authentic voice has to be firm at times. It's got to be persuasive at times, right? When working with reporters or, journalists across the country, it's got to be compassionate when I'm talking about the stories of families. It's got to be, I said firm, but sometimes it's got to be tough, right? And so there's different times where you've got to be your true self, but also know, like, look, how do I need to communicate today? There's times where I've got to just back off and do the work behind the scenes.
Yes.
Right? There's a lot of times. In fact, we were pushing major legislation through North Carolina to take our Opportunity Scholarship program from 20,000 kids now over 100,000, one of the most robust programs in the whole country. And there were times where, and I don't mind admitting this, my coalition partners would be like, why aren't you saying more publicly? I would say, the work we're doing behind the scenes is going to get this done. Then there's other times where you just got to be a bulldog and go in there and be firm. And so you've got to know when those moments are.
That's exactly right. Sometimes the best work is the quietest work. We talked earlier, the work that you're doing on yourself behind the scenes or the work you're doing advocating behind the scenes. There's a really delicate balance that's required in a lot of this work, that's knowing when to be loud and rattle cages and knowing when to shut up and listen and, go do what's necessary to make it happen and not worry about being the person who's celebrated after.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know you have experienced that a
Well, and
ton.
I got to see it, Whitney, right? Like, I'll try not to get I love doing these kind of podcasts and, and talking through this. I'm trying to get myself emotional because I'm gonna reference my dad. I got to watch my father, as a squadron commander, as a wing commander, as a NATO commander, be forward facing, right, at the right times, right? But then also quietly walk around the entire squadron, right, as a squadron commander who also was flying the airplanes, and go talk to the mechanics and talk to the engineers, and nobody else saw that, right? And so that's that important balance of, like, knowing when to be forward facing, but then also just knowing when to do the work behind the scenes. I think you kind of
Yeah, I love that you said he took the time to talk to the mechanics and kind of often the unsung heroes behind the scenes. And we go back to listening. We learn so much from taking in things, even if it's something you disagree with, or understanding what the motivations are behind the opposition or the other side. So, talk to me a little bit about how you yourself have utilized just listening to be better at what you do.
You know what? I get to do a lot of interviews on behalf of the organization across the country, whether that's state level, radio, TV, national media as well. And one thing we did a media training just a week ago for some of our young fellows who are sort of making their way through the advocacy ranks. And I said, you want to be prepared for your interview. You want to know what you want to talk about. You want to have your potential pivot points. If you get into a situation where maybe that's not something I'm comfortable discussing, I've got to move on to, the next part of my story. But also then, I found being on this side of the microphone, you've got to be able to listen to what's actually being asked of you, right? To be able to gauge the way you want to do that. I've also had the pleasure of sitting on sort of your side of the microphone and conducting a lot of interviews, whether it's working in TV, ran a really mission-based podcast for a few years called Pick Up the Six. And in that, I would often have a laundry list of questions that I want to ask. And sometimes I found out those best episodes or those best interviews would be when I got to number two and I just moved off and I just listened to what I was hearing and then engaged off of that. Same thing can be true in dialogue. Same thing can be true in sort of public debate, and even in the school choice space. We've got 32 states in the country with school choice programs. They all don't agree on the parameters and the way in which those should exist. You've got coalition dynamics at play. So you've got to be able to listen to not just what maybe your opponents are saying, right? To be able to frame, okay, look, I need to know what the teachers unions are going to say about school choice. I've got to digest that, right? To be able to combat it. But I also need to know what my friends are saying. And if it's not something I necessarily agree with, what's the lens in which they're coming at it? So yeah, listening is a big part. Before you start all that talking, we
Yes.
got to do some listening.
I love it. My dad used to say, people would say you want to be the smartest person in the room, and he always valued being the most aware. And I think so much
Well,
of the
right,
awareness comes
right.
from the listening piece. So,
It's the old line, right? About, like, sometimes you're better to keep your mouth, speak and be thoughtful, keep your mouth, open your mouth and confirm that it's true. So yeah, I
yeah.
think you're right. I totally butchered that line, but I think you get the idea.
Okay. We got the gist, so don't
That's right.
worry.
That's right.
So, you kind of segued into what I really want to talk about next, which is pick up the six. You talked about it when we prepared for this conversation. It's a great phrase because it picks up the loyalty, the service, responsibility, all those things that are innate to who you are as a person and what I would say is your personal brand. But it also connects to the way you think about opportunity and everything you've talked about so far today. So, talk to me about it. Talk to me about Pick Up the Six. Tell us all about it, how it shaped your work and your leadership.
So it's kind of like a multi-piece origin, the way that it sort of culminates. But I'll give you a couple of quick stories. We moved to North Carolina and we were in DC 2010, 26 to 2016. We moved sort of home for me. I grew up in the eastern part of the state and went to college here. And so, we moved here in 2016, got a great opportunity to join Parents for Educational Freedom. Very quickly into our time here, I found out about this men's fitness and leadership group called F3. And F3 stands for Fitness, Fellowship, and Faith. It's changed my life. It was something I never knew I needed, but absolutely did. Wasn't looking for it, but absolutely needed it. And it's a group of men that are all across the country. It's these free men's boot camp workouts. You've got them all over Dallas. We've got them all over the country at this point. And one of the things that we would say in the middle of the workouts would be, let's go pick up the six. So if we were running or if we were doing a boot camp workout, you'd always look to go get the guys in the back. And the credo of F3, very similar to the Marine Corps, the military, is leave no man behind, but leave no man where you found him. So we'd often say out loud, hey, go pick up the six. I was like, that's cool, right? Don't leave anybody back
Yes.
behind you. Always get behind. And then I think back to stories of my dad, as a flight commander, right? I mean, showing us how they would fly and talking about, right? Like, I'm on your six, I got your back. Right. And so I thought about all that and I got to this place in my life where, career was great. I've got this background in production, right? This background as a broadcaster. I'd like to unlock a little bit of that in some storytelling. And this is, 2020, podcasts are really popular. I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we took some time, maybe not forever, but if we took some time and we created this place called Pick Up the Six, where we introduce you to the men and women among you who have gone above and beyond through service, purpose, and impact. And we started just doing interviews where we just were. My thought was this: there are a lot of people that are super popular that end up on the mainstream podcast network that deserve the platform. And they're big names and they've made it across a lot of different shows. But I was like, what about my dad? Like
Yeah.
Lieutenant General Ralph Jodice. Like, what about him? Unless you served with him, most people don't know who he is, and that's fine. He wouldn't have that any other way. But what about him? What about people like him that have done incredible stuff in their life that you never heard of? I'll give you one quick example, and then we can kind of move on from it. One of my early shows, I'm a big fan of the movie Lone Survivor. Read the book, love the movie. Marcus Luttrell's story. For those of you watching, if you haven't heard of it, it's Operation Red
So
Wings.
good.
If you're from Texas, you've definitely heard of it, right?
Yes.
And Marcus is this bigger than life figure. And I got the chance to meet him one time very quickly in passing. And I was watching the movie one late, probably Friday or Saturday night. Girls are all in bed. Dad's up. Let's watch a war movie. And we're watching Lone Survivor. And there's this pivotal scene. There's no spoiler alert, but pivotal scene towards the end where they pick up Marcus and they save him. And this helicopter lands. They pick up Marcus. And right before they take off, the pilot sort of looks back over his shoulder. And then they pick up the bird and they take him off to safety. And I'm like, who's that guy? Who's that guy? Everybody knows who Marcus Luttrell is. Who's the guy flying the helicopter that picked him up? And it was Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Spanky Peterson, who was part of an Air Force Reserve crew that was actually thrust into that mission. He wasn't even supposed to fly it. And this ragtag group, and I say that with all love and support because I love these guys. This ragtag group of six are basically piloting this helicopter that has to go pick up this incredible asset. And it's him. His FE was like a Vietnam veteran. Mind you, this is 2005, right? But a Vietnam vet's on that thing. The PJ, right? So the young kid who jumps off the back of the bird that has to make sure it's Marcus almost shoots him because he's in Afghan gear, right? That guy is like right out of college, getting ready to go to med school. So I thought that was a fascinating story. And so that's kind of how we launched it with, we talked to Commander Lipple, the USS Cole, and just stories like that. And
So
it
cool.
really is so cool. And it took off a life of its own and it became sort of this sort of ethos in life, which is pick up the six, service, purpose, and impact.
Okay, Brian, I love this. And now I'm gonna have to go resurface episodes of Pick Up the Six and
Listen,
watch them.
that's one
They
of the
sound
early ones.
fantastic.
I'll point you to one of them. There's so many there, and we did over 200 of them, and they all are at
Amazing.
pickupthesix.com, right? So folks can go watch, listen to them if you want. Episode 7, I'm gonna blank on his name, but the guy was the lead interrogator. Eric, I think was his first name. Forgive me for forgetting it. It's been a couple years. He was the
Forgive
lead
it.
interrogator on all the operations that led to capturing Saddam Hussein. And we did like an hour and a half show, which is maybe the longest one we ever did. and it's like listening to a movie, the way this guy recounts the story. So yeah, there's some pretty incredible ones back there.
In for episode 7 and probably more. So that's, again, so much of who we become and then how we carry ourselves comes from stories like that and from the lessons you learn from your dad and also the lessons you learn from other people who you're like, wow, that's amazing. I want to take that with me. I want to be more like that. Um, Talk to us a little bit about that foundation of service, that foundation of pick up your six shows itself in your work today at AFC and just your broader communications and approach to telling the stories you tell.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think it goes through everything. I mean, I think if we're picking up the 6 at AFC, we're ensure that we are doing our job to ensure that every family in America, every single family has access to the school that best meets their needs, right? And so that's the mission, right? So there's my purpose. It's why we do it, right? And you can think about all these other things, but it's not your strength that holds you to the purpose. It's the strength of the purpose itself, right? So that purpose to ensure that every family is unlocked to find the school that best meets their kids' needs, right? Like that should drive what we're doing every single day. And I think it's important to be able to remember that. And so, all right, that's what you're fighting for. That's why you do it. And look, there's a lot of logistics and there's a lot of nitty gritty and there's a lot of work to be done every single day across all the facets of the organization. But from where I'm at, it's like, look, we've got to continue to push positive stories about how school choice is changing lives across the country, but how there's still more work to be done. Right. And you heard me mention before 32 states across the country have a school choice program. That means that there's a handful that don't. And we've got a new education freedom tax credit that's going to be unlocked in 2027 that can hopefully bring school choice to all 50 states. So that's just a motivator that, kind of keeps you going on a daily basis.
There's so much of this that you're a voice for people who want to make their voice louder, make their voice heard, and you're able to capture that and
And
move
when you
it
surround
forward.
yourself, you know this in building a company, right? You've done this with the other folks that work with you. When you surround yourself with other people that believe we're all rowing together. And
Yes.
I've been very fortunate to be part of some great organizations. When I joined AFC a year and a half ago, and I knew AFC for a long time, right? You go all the way back to 2011. Philip brings me in. Here's your new client, American Federation for Children. It's a long time between then and now, 15 years of knowing this organization. When I'm at Parents for Educational Freedom, right? Like they're a huge partner, our biggest partner in helping us do the work we do. And then get the chance to come here and knew it was a mission driven organization, but then to see what that teamwork is like on a daily basis, you also are like, I got to live up to that every day. Like everybody here's pulling their weight. Everybody here believes. Everybody's here to support each other. Like that motivates you too.
Culture itself is motivating. And then especially in the environment that you're in where you're like you said, you're doing work for an entire nation. It's a cool environment to be a part of. And with your work at AFC, now that you're inside, not just, a client partner, but you're in the day-to-day, you're not just building awareness for the organization or yourself or some key players. Your job is brand building for the entire movement. Not that AFC is the only player, but you guys are a big player and you're a very impactful player. And so you're trying to build that voice, that brand, that momentum to take you into all 50 states and beyond. So talk about when you came in, kind of how you've approached that. What does brand building look like in the context of I'm elevating this amazing organization? I'm elevating the voices and people behind it. And it's not just me. It's got to be everybody rowing the same direction, to your point.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about more that we talked earlier about sort of behind the scenes work. But it's interesting. I joined the organization end of January, February 2025, and God's great and moves us in different directions. And in fact, I told this story to our team just a couple days ago at some staff meetings. I was doing the Parents for Educational Freedom thing, and we saw some great strides, and we took that program to over 100,000 kids in the state, which is amazing. But I was also doing a lot of pick up the six stuff and had a little side business on the side where I was servicing clients, and all that was great. And I had considered, you know, do I make a push and go sort of all in on, going on my own? And some things had shifted in our country, and I knew there was going to be a big national push for school choice. And I talked to AFC about it and said, might have a home for you here. And I talked to my wife about it. I said, I've been doing all this pick up the six stuff, a lot of passion there, and we sort of came to this conclusion together. And she brought this up. She was like, "You're a good teammate. You're a really good teammate.
Yes.
You should go be on their team." And I was like, you know what? That really is that's astute analysis, and she's always right. And obviously there, but it's realizing that, right? It's like, you know what that is, and it's okay. This isn't egotistical. This is just you know who you are. Like I am a good teammate, and I want to
Yes.
go in there and learn about that. And so I get there in February 2025. They're like, okay, your job is to help shape the national narrative, right? Work with press behind the scenes, elevate our voice. And oh, by the way, in the next 6 months, we're going to try to do something that's never been done before. We're going to see if we can't pass a federal school choice bill and bring school choice to all 50 states through this federal tax credit. Right. So not only, right, in the beginning am I now, developing out behind the scenes relationships with reporters, producers, bookers across the country, but also, all right, how are we going to frame this up? How are we going to speak about this publicly? And it's so I think all of that to say we had very strategic but also thoughtful ways in which here's the way we are going to communicate about this. Here's going to be our narrative. Our narrative is this. Look, we have seen incredible school choice advancement across the country in the last 10 years. In the last 5, we've seen an explosion. I've already told you, and now people will be able to, recite it. 32 states plus the District of Columbia with a school choice program, nearly 20 of those universal eligibility, but it's not enough, and it's not in all 50 states. And so we believed, and we still believe at this time, that by unlocking this tax credit was part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, we could bring school choice to all 50 states. And that was our message. Every state will have school choice soon. We're bringing school choice to all 50 states. And you put all that in place, and then the logistics of it and the politics of it play out, and you've got to be able to shift because at the end of last June, June 2025, it was dicey, and we weren't sure we were going to get there. And it was late nights, and it was on summer vacation, on June 30th at 3 in the morning when Ted Cruz is on the Senate floor fighting for his life to keep this thing alive. And now we're reshaping what our message is going to look like. So it's a lot of behind the scenes. It's a lot of, how we're going to speak about this publicly. And then it's also just being flexible and being ready to pivot for whatever the day might throw at you.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you do really well at AFC is you are a part of coalitions of other groups doing the work, and you're okay with sharing what works and what didn't work in the spotlight and some of that stuff, and just elevating people where they're at their highest and best use, including the members of Congress or members of state legislatures that are also partnering with you on this great work. Which is kind of where I went ahead and the little weeds a little bit. You mentioned it. School choice has changed dramatically over the last 15 years. And even the people who are supportive of it, the coalitions behind it have changed and grown. And you personally, but also AFC, you've been at the center of all of this work. How would you describe to someone who is aware that school choice is an issue, maybe has dabbled, they've looked at private schools or scholarships or ESAs, something like that for their kids? How would you describe the state of school choice right now across the country?
Well, it really has been incredible momentum. And, there's some sort of key markers. We don't need to live in the past too much. And, you've probably talked about sort of the COVID impact across our society. But, COVID really was a bit of a tipping point, specifically in K-12 education. At the time we had a second grader sent home from school, virtual learning, couldn't really get an answer on when we were going to go back to school. I mean, it was frustrating for a lot of families.
Yes.
And it was also an eye opener because I think a lot of families saw the way in which education was delivered to their kids. They were then now, I mean, look, we weren't teaching our kids. Be candid, right? Because we're working, but we're trying to balance everything. We're seeing the way in which education is being delivered, how they consumed it, and then sort of what was going back out. And I think a lot of families kind of looked around and were like, that's it. And then couldn't get on answers on when they'd go back to school and all that. So it really was a major inflection point. And then you just continue to see state legislatures do the right thing and expand these because it's about what parents are asking for. So ultimately, here's what I do. And this is, I think, a great way to do this. And I really learned this well from Quan Graham. She's the parent liaison coordinator at Parents for Educational Freedom. She would talk to a family. She would just ask them about their family. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your kids. Right. And that's when she was helping parents get on school choice programs. But I tend to do that a lot today. If we're talking to legislators, members of the media, I do want to get to know who they are. And I want to know what their experience is like because everybody's got a lens in life, Whitney. I mean, everybody has got their life experiences that shape the way they look at things. Now as a dad of two girls, right, that are well in their schooling process, like I look at it a lot differently than I did 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And so I think just knowing where people are coming from, can help it. And as we're building these narratives or as we're building our sort of our messaging across the country, we've got to have sort of big strategies, but then we've also got to be able to move based on what's happening. And look, the way we talk about school choice in Tennessee might be very different than the way we talk about school choice in Pennsylvania. The way that we talk about opting in for the education freedom tax credit, right, which all governors have to opt into, in some
Yes.
states is very different than we do in others. And to your question about coalitions, it's about knowing where our voice is needed, where my voice specifically as national press secretary is needed, or who could be better to speak to this, or is it someone else in the coalition, right, that can help get this done, and not being territorial on that, because ultimately, right, however it gets done, kids are benefiting, like that's all good.
That is the best way to approach it. And you mentioned everybody has a different lens. And I think when it comes to an issue like school choice, there's a lens and then there's also the motivation. Like every parent who's looking for another option is doing it for their own unique reason. Every kid, we know every kid is unique. Not every family situation is the same. And so the motivation behind seeking change, COVID really, to your point, peeled back the layers of the onion. And a lot of parents woke up to, wait a minute, what's going on here? But it exacerbated the problems in places where the problems already existed. They moved tenfold, you know, downstream instead of upstream. And I think AFC has done a great job pointing that out. COVID was a brand building fail for the public school system, if we're being honest with ourselves.
Yeah, and
So
also, Whitney, it's about shedding light on what's really been happening inside education for
yes,
40 years. And I'm not gonna take a big political stance here, but look, I mean, our education system has been run by this bureaucratic machine. So there's a couple inflection points. The longer it goes on, the more we spend, people are asking more. Regular families across the country, like, we're spending $1 trillion a year on education in America. We've got this sort of weird middleman in DC that, like, Department of Education, that, like, nobody really knows, like, what's happening there. And then every news report shows you that kids are falling further and further behind. And so you've got to unlock more opportunities. And then you see school choice advancements, and see states like Florida that have had, major programs for 15 years, and kids are doing well. The public schools around those kids are doing better. People can see that, right? And candidly, and this is, I say this all the time. There are incredible public schools, public school teachers, principals, like, doing amazing work. I'm a product of both. Went to small Catholic school, went to a massive public school in Northern Virginia. I've seen both, and it worked well for me. But the bureaucratic stranglehold, and sort of what we call, like, this big education machine, and candidly, the bosses at the teachers unions, they could not be further away from the classroom and further away from students, and I think more and
yes.
more people see that.
Completely agree with you. And, I'm the product of a public school system. I went to a great high school. I feel like I benefited from my situation. But for my son, we made a different choice. And he went to high school at a charter school because that was the best choice for us and for him. And given the situation at the time, we're so lucky that we have the opportunity to do that. Uh, Texas has made some moves, on this front.
Big
We're gonna have
moves,
some
yeah,
we're gonna have some listeners and viewers from Texas. So do you mind giving us a short soundbite on where Texas is at
yeah.
specifically?
Yeah, listen, no big deal, just created the nation's largest day one school choice program in the history of America.
Very
So,
Texas of us.
Tech, of course, it's awfully Texan of you, and we would expect nothing but that. But then again, it's like 30 years in the making. I mean, it's been a long time coming, and most people think, "Oh, Texas, pretty conservative state. Of course they have school choice." And it's like, well, no, not really. And there's just a lot of dynamics at play. And it takes a long time, takes the right leadership, it takes momentum, it takes timing. And so, yeah, Texas is incredible. Just opened up their program this year, $1 billion program. Can report that over 100,000 kids, as we, sort of hopefully anticipated, will be on the program in year one. And those are students with disabilities and their siblings and low income families. So that's beautiful, right? When a new
Amazing.
program starts and it's serving families like that. And so Texas went big. Look, it's not the biggest program in the country. Florida's got, a 500,000 kids on school choice programs. You got multiple states, including the old North State of North Carolina, that had over 100,000 kids. But as it goes for, the first year, Texas has rung the bell, and, largest day one program in the history of the country. And look, they'll be looking to expand it in short order, as they should. And so that'll take more work, and continue to grow. So shout out to Texas, but also to all the other states for continuing to push, right? And because that's what can help make this a reality. And there's still more states to be unlocked, and there's still more kids that need access to programs like this. And you said it. I mean, look, families have multiple kids, and those kids are going to different schools sometimes, right? My kids went to the same K-8 school, but that's not the case for everyone. And so you've got to be able to just, get those options out there, and state legislatures have done a great job of expanding it.
Yeah, and I think what's cool is that, for the states that have been doing this over time, they've got proof of concept now that when you innovate, when you challenge, when you are willing to try something different and give parents the opportunity to choose it, cool things happen. And so those stories now have bubbled to the top, but I think it's giving states like Texas and other places that are doing this something to point to and say, but we want to do the best by kids and families. And so this is what we're going to do.
Yep, totally.
Um, you've been so patient. We're going, a little bit over time, but I kind of want to bring this back
We can do
to
this all day. What else? I mean, what
awesome.
else do you want to talk?
I know, I could too. It's great.
We can talk more about the Giants. We can talk more about hockey. I mean, really, whatever.
For sure. I know. The sports podcast is coming next for sure. But seriously, the brand building lessons that you've had in your own path, and again, nonlinear, it's you've been willing to say yes to opportunities that maybe were outside what you expected of the norm. For leaders, up and coming people that are maybe fresh out of school, maybe they're mid career and they want to change, those people who are trying to build an audience or a brand for themselves and trust and grow an organization. We're gonna do a little rapid fire. So to those people, what is the work that they need to be willing to do before anyone is watching?
Yeah, all of it, right? Like all of it. I mean, I think nothing's below you, and I think the more that you can say yes or creatively think about where that opportunity can come from. I mean, to be right out of college and to be wanting to be on air and to be thrust into editing tape at 3:30 in the morning, I didn't really want to do that, but it created a pathway to be 29 years old, caddying, and then going to take an internship.
Yes,
And the people I was reporting to were 4 or 5 years younger than me. Did I really want to do that? But there's an opportunity. And so I think it's just look, if that door is cracked a little bit, just keep your eyes open, and take that opportunity.
love that. What does saying yes to opportunity mean when you want to say yes to opportunities, but you don't want to lose the ultimate focus, or end up looking like you're all over the place?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's stay purpose. I mean, I could say this all day, is stay purpose driven. You've got to be able to come back to your purpose. And it doesn't have to be something grandiose. I believe God put me on this earth to connect people to something bigger than themselves. Okay, there's my life purpose. For me, that can mean a lot of different things, right? When I was a small town TV anchor, I was the way in which families got to watch their kids' volleyball tournament. They weren't showing it on cable TV or on ESPN,
Appreciate.
right? Our local TV station connected people to something bigger than themselves, their community. When I was at Military Families United and we got to serve those Gold Star families who had lost a loved one in combat, paid the ultimate price. We brought them all to DC for this amazing weekend. They were connected to something bigger than themselves, right? In this school choice movement, the work that we've done at Parents for Educational Freedom, at the American Federation for Children, and at other school choice organizations across the country are impacting millions of lives bigger than themselves. And I was sharing those stories at Pick Up the Six. I was I was connecting people to something bigger than themselves. And it's not about me. It's just about it's about that purpose. It's about listening to what God wasn't exactly telling me at the time, right? But just being ready for what that next opportunity might bring.
I love that. And you've kind of answered this a bit, but just for putting a finite point on it, what is one habit, one specific thing that you know has served you well throughout your career?
Yeah, I think it's if it's a habit or if it's just more of a mindset of just keep working. Even if you're down, even if something's not working the way you want to, like kind of, it's somewhat simple. It's like just keep grinding. Like you got to keep working. And I've seen this play out not just in the workspace, but in people's personal lives. Like, look, there's ups and downs, and there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes that people will never see, whether it's in your career, whether it's in your marriage, whether it's in if you're a parent, right? Like, people can see the good stuff, but there's a lot that happens behind the scenes, sort of where this conversation started. And so it keep doing the work behind the scenes when no one's looking. That's what I think prepares you for when the lights are on.
What a perfect way to wrap up the conversation. Brian, this has been such a pleasure. As always, you are full of insight, and passion. I think that's one big thing that has driven your ability to do the work is that you have such a passion, for helping others. And the thread that hopefully everybody will go back to after this as well is that brands and audiences do not just magically build themselves overnight. They take work, they take the moments that people do not see, and then they take that consistently, the themes of service, trust, and a willingness to do the work long before, as Brian said, the spotlight shows up. So thank you for joining us today and for sharing both the personal story and the bigger picture of what's happening in school choice. Thank you for the great work you're doing. Excited about the momentum. I think I met you in 2012. So if we went back and thought where we'd be today, we'd probably be excited to see the movement and just super excited to see what happens for children and families going forward. And to everyone else, stay tuned for the next episode of Flex Live.